Hi stock investors, JJ here. Welcome back. Well, we've got to talk about small caps, which are suddenly all the rage and a lot of people talking about it, including Tom Lee. We'll get to his clip. He's bullish on small caps. He has been for a while. He did say that he thinks they'll rise 50% this year, not to the rest of this year, but throughout the year. And it does seem to be suddenly happening. And we can see that the Russell 2000 here, the small cap index, has suddenly shot up since the CPI inflation report came out not so long ago, and it's up 8.66% for the year, which is not as much as the S&P 500 so far, which is up 18.73% for the year, which is, if you think around 10%, 9 or 10% is the average, that's pretty good. That's pretty amazing. And of course, the NASDAQ is up 25% this year. So can small caps make a comeback here? So I wouldn't mind if they do, because I'm heavy into small caps. This portfolio here of mine, which is mostly small caps, there's 8 stocks in this portfolio, don't have a lot, fairly focused. And this one's up 18.75% this year. As I said, vast majority small caps, some mid caps, but I'm not unhappy about the performance so far, matching the S&P 500 neck and neck. Really, it was up nearly 40% at some points. One of the sectors that I'm in has been pretty volatile, but I would not be unhappy if small caps in general took a run for the rest of the year. I'd be pretty happy with that. So anyway, let's get back to Tom Lee and see what he says about small caps. What's his case? What's his bullish case for small caps?
Now, I got to ask about your small cap call. I think you said a few months ago that small caps could rise 50%. We saw at the end of last week some interesting rotation into small caps. How much further in 24 can they run?
When he says rotation, the S&P 500 actually went down on that day when small caps took off. The Russell took off. It went up significantly. I think it was 3.5%, nearly 4%, and the S&P 500 index, the mega caps, was actually down on that day. So it did seem like an immediate rotation on that CPI print.
I think the rally that started last week for small caps is going to be larger than the October to December rally of last year. That was over 8 weeks, almost a 30% gain for the Russell 2000. This time we have a larger short position by institutions. We have small caps even more oversold, and valuations, whether you look at median PE, which is now at 10 times 2025 earnings, even lower. So we think that this move could be something like 10 weeks and as much as 40%. So I think it is.
Wow, 40% over 10 weeks, he's saying. He does. I think it's crazy how he tries to predict the short term here. He's had a good run, so he's been lucky, and they've been having him on these programs more and more. He was wrong in 2022 in the bear market. As we can see there, 8.21% on the screen there, but before this run, it was only like 3.5%, just over 3%, I think, that the Russell 2000 all year had gone up. So it's a rapid rise, and it was way below, pretty much flat, and not just this year, for a number of years. So is it going to catch up?
It is just starting, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that, the June CPI was so astonishingly soft. I think it's giving the green light for small caps to rally finally, because the Fed will ultimately cut, hopefully by September.
And how much do you expect the S&P to potentially rise over that same 10 weeks?
That's a good question. I think July, our base case remains that July should be good for the S&P 500. So, something like 57, maybe even close to 5,800 in July. But I think that August is really going to be one where the rotation becomes more evident, and I think it's going to be a stronger small cap and maybe flat to slightly down for the S&P.
Okay, and so...
Well, interesting. So he thinks the S&P is going to be slightly down in August, which is, really summer months, peak summer, nothing much going on. A lot of people on holiday. It'd be interesting to see if small caps continue to run, or what he says comes to fruition of 50% for the year. That would be a major rotation. But as I said, it is about individual companies, and these stocks are slices of companies, individual companies. So the good small caps, just as a lot of people do, tend to spray and pray.
And so that's what I was getting at is how strong can the small cap, say the Russell 2000 as a proxy, be versus the S&P 500? And you're saying after July, you actually think that there's going to be a significant outperformance of small caps versus that index?
Yes, and that's kind of what happened in that October to December rally. That, as you know, the large caps actually really sputtered in late December and early January because of that rotation into small caps. And I think, again, because the positioning is even more short relative to large caps, that it could be an even more sizable move.
All right. So that's Tom Lee. He thinks it's a sizable move, an even more sizable move than happened. Can it be sustained? That's the question. So there's another perspective here. I'm just going to play another clip that I can kind of riff off. So small caps tend to outperform as the broaden out. That doesn't make sense, that the clip title they've got there, but as the market broadens out, what they mean there is the market broadens, so it means that the S&P 500 could still keep going, but the market broadens out as rate cuts come along. So this is someone from Goldman Sachs, Greg Tuorto.
Small cap stocks closing out the week with big gains. The Russell 2000 jumping 6% for its best week since November. So is there still time to get in if you missed the move this week? Joining us now is Greg Tuorto, portfolio manager at Goldman Sachs Asset Management. Greg, tell me a story about why it's time for small caps, because higher for longer seems like that's the reality, even if we've got a cut or so coming and the banks aren't lending a lot to small businesses.
Well, you know, I think it's been about 2.5 years since small caps have had a leadership role in the markets. And I think that what you've needed has been this rate certainty, you know, to kind of understand when the Fed was going to start cutting. And I think that as we've gotten through this last CPI report, we have a lot more line of sight to when that's going to happen. And I do think that as you kind of embrace the backdrop of a lower rate regime, or lower from here, you're going to see a lot of the tailwinds start to come up, whether it's valuation, some idiosyncratic opportunities within the small caps themselves, or just that, you know, kind of explosive nature of small caps when they do start to work like they did yesterday. They
can be explosive, small caps. They can go up a lot in a short time, and that's exactly what Tom Lee's predicting here. So poised for a comeback, small caps, it says valuations are attractive, catalysts are abundant, multiple catalysts, the interest rate rise coming in possibly September. You know, it was predicted there was going to be 6 or 7 this year, didn't happen. And so it looks like it could be September because of that CPI print. We have to wait and see. It's really hard to predict, impossible to predict really. But small caps offer diversification away from the S&P 500 concentration risk. And as we've seen, it's been so top heavy in those mega caps, seen as a safe play. There's been a bit of rotation. Will that happen, or will it broaden out? So it has historically generated strong returns following a dissipation of extreme mega cap concentration, which has been the case here. I mean, I don't know how much historically haven't been mega caps, but the Nifty 50 bubble was where there were like the top 50 companies did run up a lot, and that was a bubble. It turned into a crash. I don't know how many people think that's going to happen here. Anyway, let's get back to see what else he's saying here.
It shows you that you really need to be invested in these things over a longer period of time, not try to time the market.
My concern, though, is do they work consistently over a period of time, or do they just not underperform as much as they were before? And I look a lot at software stocks, and some of those that seem to have some pretty good technology and some pretty decent growth, just valuation-wise, haven't been able to catch a break.
Yeah, I think the parts of the market that you think about a lot for small cap, software, biotech, banks, those types of areas are going to be areas that I think are fertile for stock picking. There's a lot of dispersion out there where you can find some companies with some really, really good trends. We like cybersecurity, for example. We think that there's durability there, and we think that there's some shielding from the AI trends, which are siphoning some dollars out of traditional AI budgets. And I do think that, you know, the backdrop, you know, as our asset management division put out a mid-year report this week, you know, the small caps, as they broaden out, then they tend to outperform, because I think as the catalysts start to add up, you start to see more allocation in there. And there really hasn't been any institutional allocation to small caps in a couple of years. So the money has to come back in, and I think that's when you start to see that consistency you're talking about being a real nice tailwind.
At the same time.
Okay, so his argument there is that there's institutional money kind of on the sidelines, or rotation from bigger caps into the small caps. They feel comfortable doing that with rate cuts going along, so money going in and sort of rising tide lifting all boats, lifting the Russell 2000 index, for instance. But it is always about stock picking the good companies. There are a lot of, there are a lot of not great small caps and micro caps, especially, which on the OTC market, they're not. If we look beyond the Russell 2000, I do own stocks on the OTC market, the over the counter market, dipping into that. But you really do have to do your analysis on that kind of if you're going to dive into there. But there are some small caps, quite big caps actually these days on that market. And so there's definitely, as I say, it seems to be a tailwind for small caps starting. We'll have to see if that continues. What do you think? Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think that this is the start of, rotation into small caps, or a beginning of a good run for small caps? As I said, I have that portfolio that's doing well already this year. Can it do a lot better? We have to see what goes on there. I'd love to see that go further. And I do have, if you're interested, I do have on this new channel, Stocks Today with JJ, which I'll leave a link to in the description. More talk on small caps, responding to these clips, and also on the main channel, The Art of Value here. There's more on small caps if you want to dive into that. This is a search on small caps, and I'll put a couple of links in the description as well. And also this book here, I was reminded of what Charlie Munger said about small caps. I'm listening to this book at the moment, and again, this is an audio book, a relatively new audio book, so it's great to have it in audio form, this classic book. And just yesterday, Charlie Munger, I caught what he was saying in one of the talks there about if he was, it was a few years ago, he's dead now, of course, but he was talking about if he were younger, he would get into small caps to start off. He would be looking at these small caps. He thinks, I can't remember the exact wording, but he said it would be a fine strategy to take to look at good quality small cap stocks. And that's what I'm talking about, not, just diving into anything these days. And so let me know what you think of that in the comments. So on screen, I'm going to leave a link to what YouTube thinks that you should watch next if you're watching this on YouTube, and a subscribe button to subscribe to this channel. And I'll leave a link to Stocks Today with JJ as well. And also I also talk about small cap stocks on Patreon, the Art of Value Patreon. I'll leave a link to that if you want to join us over there too. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.